Now, for more on the bilateral ties between China and India, we're joined by Ankur Patel, data scientist at Theta Ray. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So what would you say are the main expectations for this visit?
So the primary objective of the visit is to reduce the tension between the two countries over all the border issues and the disputes that they've had in recent years. And if we could just reduce the temperature in the room, I think it will allow for more fruitful conversation between the two countries on economic development and particularly trade.
And what do you think are some of the benefits of having an informal visit as a way to build closer economic ties?
I think the informal visit, what it does is it reduces expectations. So there's less pressure for either country to go back and say they've met X, Y, and Z objectives. It's more of an open conversation to say, look, it's in our best interest of both parties to be and have open conversations, to trade more with each other, particularly at a time when the United States, for example, is becoming very protectionist. And the informal talks makes the expectations lower, but allows for more open conversations to take place.
And so as we look at what's happening with protectionism on the one side, talk about the sectors and the trade pacts that we're likely to see perhaps some progress or more cooperation on with this visit.
So right now, China exports more to India than it imports. And China's exporting mostly electronic equipment to India. And this goes actually really well because India's middle income class is growing. It's consuming quite a bit. And so from a trade perspective, China really stands to benefit the most. If India and China were to trade more, it would primarily be to China's benefit. There may be ways that India can benefit too, but China stands to benefit the most.
So you mentioned China's benefits. What are some of the ways that India benefits as well?
So I think India can benefit from some of the intellectual capital that can flow between the two countries. So I'll just give you an example. Artificial intelligence. China is actually very far in that race alongside the US when it comes to global AI, whereas India has done poorly on that metric. And this is really a chance for India to benefit from some of the intellectual capital that can flow between the two countries by doing more trade.
Now, we know that both countries want to upgrade their economies and also continue to lift their residents out of poverty. So what are some of the common economic goals that China and India share?
I think there are a couple. I think one is infrastructure. And on that metric, China does a lot better because the policies are very state-oriented and state-driven, whereas India obviously has a messy democracy, and the infrastructure is certainly not where it needs to be. And I think both countries will benefit if there's generally stronger infrastructure, bridges, roads, airports, and the like. And I think that might be a common ground for the two countries if they could get beyond the border disputes.
And so to that point then, how would you describe the overall nature of economic ties between China and India, both in terms of how they've developed and the potential challenges?
So I think very little has developed. I mean, if you could just look at China's trade with the U.S. versus China's trade with India. China's trade with the U.S. is about 10 times as large, 10 times greater in actual dollars than it is with India. So there's a long way to go between China and India when it comes to trade, but this is an excellent opportunity because at a time when the U.S. is turning against global trade, becoming more protectionist, China and India can trade more with each other. So they stand to benefit in this type of environment.
Now, by the year 2027, the IMF predicts that India will be the third biggest economy behind the US and China. What do you think is going to drive that growth?
Well, India has some unique benefits that very few countries have. One, it has a very large population, but that large population is also very, very young. I mean, if you compare that to China, China has a very large population, but it's rapidly aging because of the one-child policy. So that young, rapidly growing economy backed by greater consumer appetite among the Indians is what's going to drive that growth. It's going to be mostly domestic consumption-driven growth that drives India forward.
All right, thank you so much. Ankur Patel there, data scientist at Theta Ray.